Hello, I'm Jeff Bernstein. I'm the Director of Programming here at Explore. And I don't know how many of you know, but it's now 7 years ago Explore was purchased by the Public Interest Network, which is a consortium of environmental and consumer groups. And they have hired me recently. I used to work for them, and now I work for them. And they hired me to kind of make the bookstore more than just a great bookstore, but make it a community space where there are events that take place, like great events like this, and so to sort of get our name on so that people are thinking, oh, what's going on at the Institute, what's going on at Belly Up, what's going on at Anderson Ranch, and then they might think, oh, what's going on at Explore. So that's what I'm trying to do here. The organization that owns the bookstore, it's this consortium. You may have heard of some of our members, COPERG, the Colorado Public Interest Research Group, Environment Colorado, Environment America, Snow Riders, Green Century Funds. We are thrilled to have Hal Harvey with us today to be interviewed by Commissioner Greg Poschman. I want to thank COPERG, Environment Colorado, Gore, the Community Office for Resource Efficiency. They have supplied the delicious munchies that we've been working on for the last half hour, so thank you very much, Gore. Maggie, the bookstore dog, she'll be waiting for somebody to hand her some food. So Gore, Environment Colorado, Environment America, we're all trying to move the Roaring Fork Valley to a carbon-free future, and I think that's one of the things these gentlemen will be talking about. There's information about the various organizations out there in the literature department. What's going to happen is these gentlemen will have their conversation. Hal is going to sign books for a while over here, and then the bookstore closes at 6, but you're not kicked out at 6. You just have to get the books bought by 6, and then happy to have you stay. And so that's all for me. I'm going to now introduce Wendy Wendlandt, who's here from Environment America. She's the Senior Vice President of the organization that owns the bookstore, the Public Interest Network, and the President of Environment America. She will introduce Hal, and off we go. So thank you for coming.
Okay, great. So fun to be in a room with people. How weird is that? Yes. For the last
Not everybody here qualifies, but
so just quickly, as Jeff said, I'm President of Environment America and a Senior Vice President with the Public Interest Network, and we bought the bookstore a few years ago and are thrilled to be able to offer community programming like this. Our particular guest today, we're really excited about Hal Harvey because he really fits the kind of person that we want to feature at the bookstore. He's local. I mean, he grew up here. He doesn't live here anymore, I don't think. But
a celebrity. He's a celebrity.
He's a celebrity. His mother, I think, is a celebrity. I love what it seems like she did for this valley, protecting the expanding the national forest, particularly the Maroon Bells area. And most importantly for our work is the work that he has done which I think is unknown, in the public sphere, is the work that he has done to build out energy policy in this country. And he's done that in a couple of ways, and I'll be short. It would take days to read off every accomplishment, but you can Google and find out more after you hear him today. But I'll say a couple of things. One is he has founded or expanded several of the major institutions in philanthropy that have funded groups like ours to address the climate crisis. So the Energy Foundation, Climate Works, the Hewlett Foundation, I mean there's a number of other groups, including those that he's with now, Climate Imperative and the Energy Innovation Project. But I think more importantly is the work that he has done to help make sure that we are pursuing smart policies, that everybody is panicked about climate, but from what I have understood about the work that he has done, this is somebody who has brought his engineering mind to the problem of how are we going to solve climate change. And I want to read just one sentence in the book, and then I'll turn it over to these lovely gentlemen for a conversation. But when I read this in his book, this just spoke to me completely. He's talking about, all the great things we're doing, are the consumer, we're good recyclers, and we bought a Prius or a Tesla. Maybe you're worried about that now, but you don't know about that. But then he says, these actions are important, but by themselves they are not enough. The world will not be saved by conscientious green consumers who decide one family at a time to drive less or install solar panels on the roof. The problem is just too big for that. Instead, we all need to become green citizens. And I'm hoping that these two will talk more about what he means by that. But to me, that's the name of the game here. And I've talked to a number of you, just, some of you I knew ahead of time, but some of you I've just met today, and I know that many of you are in your own ways doing exactly this, which is engaging in policy, pushing it forward, working with other people to do that. And so I deeply appreciate the fact that you have been advancing that idea, in books. My friends who work in the closer space to Hal's work say he's a whisperer to very important people about these ideas. So hopefully he'll do more than whisper today, and give us some direction about what we should do in the coming years. So thank you so much to both of you. And we have, as Jeff said, Greg Poschman, who I keep, like Jeff, want to keep saying supervisor, because in Los Angeles, where I live, that's what we call our county people. But he's a county commissioner, and as I understand it, leading the fight for sustainability here in the Roaring Fork Valley. So a perfect person to interview Hal about his book and any other topic that seems interesting, right?
Great,
Thank
thanks,
you so
Wendy.
much.
Thank you. Well, Wendy just about covered the intro. But there is more. And I wanted to say, I'm on a board, an enlightened board of county commissioners, and all 5 of us are pushing on the biggest levers we can find for sustainability and climate. So I'm lucky enough to be sitting here on the hot seat with Hal, but all of our board of county commissioners are like-minded, and we have a consensus generally. A few years ago, a group of kids came into our board and demanded that we declare a climate emergency, and we come up with a climate action plan. My children among them, who are here tonight, grateful for that, but you can't say no when the kids start requesting these things. And we'll get to some of that in the book. I did want to make some quick thank yous. I want to thank Explore for hosting us. Once again, having a great bookstore in a town, especially this size, is so important. It's a measure of civilization and sophistication, and I'm so grateful that Explore Books is in such great hands now with Environment America and your team. They're starting to do some amazing things with Explore. Environment America for coming in and joining us here and participating in the community with us, which is great, and I think there'll be more to come on that. And I want to thank Gore. I happen to sit on the board of Gore, the Community Office for Resource Efficiency, founded by the former host at Explore, Bill Sterling, who's sitting in the back, years and years ago, 25 plus years ago. Core is now we're calling it Core 2.0. Several of our board members are here, and we are becoming, I'm going to say, very aggressive and have big plans for how our community is going to work on climate and our region. We're going to be expanding beyond that. So I'm hoping you can all learn more about Core and participate as we move forward. And you'll be hearing more from Core. On that note, I want to introduce Hal Harvey, is the first inductee, I'm going to say, onto Core's National Advisory Council. We're building a board of national advisors, people who can help us plot our course and shape the destiny of Core and help our community stay strong and our state and move toward moving in the right direction. So I want to welcome Hal to Core's National Advisory Council, and I told him it's a perpetual seat. He can never really leave it. So that's a good thing, and we'll hear more about that as well. I guess I want to start picking up from where Wendy left off. It's the Margaret Mead quote, and you could probably all repeat it back to me. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And that has resonated with me for years, I'm sure others as well. And I kind of want to steer our conversation in that direction. And as Wendy alluded earlier, Hal is the son of a very powerful doyen of environmental conservation in our valley, Connie Harvey, who with Dottie Fox and Joy Caudell, 2 other famous and powerful women, created about 500,000 acres of wilderness that surrounds us now. The Maroon Bells Wilderness, maybe part of the Holy Cross and other areas. I was thinking about that and like, here we go, small group of committed people. They were just living the Margaret Mead words right there. And so I think that's what I'm taking away from Hal's book, Big Fix. is that it's time for regular citizens to understand what we can actually do as we try to combat a climate crisis or reduce carbon emissions. We can't just decide to leave it up to the governments, whether they're federal, state, or local. I think we all need to be involved, and this is practical solutions to help us to do that. So we're going to get into that. I'm going to give a quick bio, just in case parts wouldn't be missed. Hal was born in Aspen, in a hollow just outside of town. A formidable mother and so many siblings. I don't really remember how many. At least one is here in the room tonight. Mostly educated in the Aspen schools. And then he fled Aspen on a bicycle to get himself to a private school where he could get a better education. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. Tell us just briefly about that.
Well, a bunch of hippies started a school in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and I wanted to go to that school, and my mom said, fine, but two things, we're not taking you there and we're not paying for it. Which was, she thought sufficient, but it wasn't quite sufficient. So, however old you are when you're a freshman in high school, so how old would you?
14 or so.
14, so I rode a bike to Steamboat Springs over Cottonwood Pass, which was mud and snow. It took 3 days to get there.
That's a sign of his commitment and resilience and willpower. You worked at RMI for a while, is that right?
Back in the old days.
With Amory, back
Yes.
in the old days.
Yes, and wrote a book on national security back then.
Right. So your bibliography is pretty diverse. It's short, but it's diverse. 3 or 4 really powerful books, right? Or are there more than that?
They're just world shaping, every one of them.
Oh yeah, exactly. Okay. As Wendy said, yes, we have a few here. And since then, Hal's been a consultant to presidents, prime ministers, and kings. He has the ear of people like Tom Friedman and John Doerr and so many others. And when you start talking about the foundations, the Energy Foundation, innovation programs you've started in other countries, things that I had no idea about. So I think I'm getting to the first question. Just tell us about the niche that you found in research and analysis of climate solutions and the progress you've made briefly. Like what's your path here from Aspen High School and Maroon Creek to where you sit today?
So a long and tortured path. No, so I came of age. Who remembers Jimmy Carter's Middle East policy? Yes, so he created something called the Rapid Deployment Force, which Gary Hart called neither rapid nor deployable nor a force. But other than that, perfectly named. But this was to protect the sea lanes to get access to the Persian Gulf oil, which America needed. And one of the concluding chapters of the Vietnam War was an abolishment of the draft. And Jimmy Carter modestly reinstated a big part of it. You had to go register for selective service down at the Aspen post office. And that's a sobering moment when you sign up to protect our access to Gulf oil. And luckily, we were not called to service. But at the same time, I was working with Paul Rubin and John Katzenberger on a house that a friend of mine lives in, named Greg.
My house.
Yes, true story. And so we were working on building this solar home and at the same time signing up for the draft. And those two things made no sense. So there had to be a better way.
Can you both speak up a little bit?
Sure.
Oh, for the people in the back. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start with, as a layperson and a county commissioner, it's really it's like a master's degree program where you learn so many things are thrown at you. What I come away with is a sense of overwhelm, and I think we've got a generation coming up who seem pretty discouraged, and so I'm going to say I took a sense of optimism from reading your book, and I only put these notes in today just so you know.
Yeah.
I have read it a couple times, and I think that the thing that I would like to take away from today is what is your perspective on how are we doing? Can we solve this? Are we going to be able to pull this off? I want to walk away with a sense of optimism because I don't think we have a choice.
So that's for the concluding remarks, Greg.
I know, we're going to get back around to that.
So, I mean, I guess where it starts, I think, is with a method. Carbon accumulations in the atmosphere are indifferent to the location, right? The atmosphere mixes quite a bit. So it's not like acid rain where it falls in the steel towns of Pennsylvania, say. So if you can eliminate a ton of carbon anywhere, it's as good as eliminating it anywhere else. So you need to begin with math. And so the method is the first thing I'd have to say. The method is absolutely crucial. Begin with the math. What is the source of carbon emissions and other pollutants like methane? What's the most feasible technical solution? What are the obstacles to that solution? And who decides? Who decides whether that solution happens or not? And if you go through this exercise, and it has to be constrained by mathematics or illuminated by mathematics, a small number of hugely important strategies reveal themselves. When most people talk about climate change, they talk about the fearsome things, and it's well to understand them. You know, the droughts, the floods, the forest fires, the starvation, the prospect of 240 million climate refugees by 2050. There's no political system in the world that can handle a flood of humanity. When you're confronted with this wall of problems, which is in some ways abstract, in some ways distant in time and distant in geography, it's easy to become discouraged. It just looks impossible. And then there's the solutions, and there's so many different ones. Eat less beef, right? Change the light bulbs in your house. It's the green consumer idea. If the solution doesn't scale against the problem, it's not where we should concentrate our energy. So you have to go through the discipline. There's no alternative to say what's the most feasible way to rapidly reduce carbon emissions. And it has to be speed and scale have to drive your decision making, have to drive your analysis. And luckily, there are clear answers for most sectors of the economy to this problem. Unluckily, there's very little focus on these solutions, which was the genesis of this book, is you have to focus on the small number of things that make a huge difference. And you have to have what I call a precision intervention to win those battles, to win those choices. And so that's the beginnings of wisdom, I hope. And I didn't invent the method, but.
So it starts with your discussion of the learning curve. And people have heard about taking things to scale. Anything you want to add to help illustrate that?
So the first solar panels were used for satellites. That's a high value use to power a solar satellite. And broadly speaking, the next generation of solar panels were dope growers in Northern California because they didn't want meter readers coming around, right? So they were willing to pay a lot of money for solar panels, and solar panels were really expensive. Then came the billboard market, right? You don't want to run a power line all the way out to the highway to light up a billboard. And so one by one, these markets revealed themselves, and as they did, the solar panels got slightly cheaper and slightly cheaper. But it was still exotic and unreliable and way too expensive. And these early solar panels were 3% efficient, 5% efficient, 7% efficient. So I sometimes say an unwritten bargain was struck between the Germans and the Chinese, where the Germans agreed to overpay and the Chinese agreed to overproduce solar cells. And they spent a bucket of money on pushing this technology out into the system. And the price dropped and dropped and dropped. And so now the cheapest form of energy on planet Earth is a solar cell, by a long shot. There are bids of 2 cents a kilowatt hour. For comparison, you probably pay between 20 and 30 cents per kilowatt hour for your electricity today. Now, there's a difference between wholesale and retail pricing and so forth. But the same economies of scale that made Ford Motor Company successful back in the 1930s, I guess, that made flat screen televisions cheap, was there for the asking in the energy space. And finally, after decades of neglect, people started asking for that. And it unleashed this huge panoply of solutions. It's not the only learning curve out there, but it's a great example.
Great, thank you. So I could go through
I love the way he holds up the book every time.
And it's only 29 or whatever it is. We're not going to reveal everything that's in this book, but what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about how you share the stories of people, individuals who made a difference. So I'm gonna segue a little bit. The book, I can say, discusses where we live and work, building codes. What are we doing about oil? Turns out we have too much oil for the atmosphere to absorb. Who's working on this stuff? And the thing that's really fascinating with your partner on the book, Justin Gillis, you've got some examples of people. Are there any favorite examples, if I can jump ahead, into how do we connect this with somebody in the audience here who's trying to figure out what they can personally do? What examples would you share?
Well, I think the Margaret Mead quote is a great way to start. If you focus on the right thing, you're halfway to the solution. But then you have to concentrate on the venue itself. Who makes the decision and how do they make it? And you have to begin to understand political tipping points. And the best ones, in my opinion, come from unusual allies. So there was a woman whose name I'm blanking on right now, who's a Republican in the eastern plains of Colorado, who knows how windy it is out there. I don't know how many people have spent time in the eastern plains of Colorado. It's almost half the state. It's not the loveliest half. Anyway, she grew up when there were windmills for pumping water and for microgrids. One windmill, 10 light bulbs, that's it. But she realized that it was so windy out there that farmers could get a second crop. And anyone who's been in the agricultural business understands there are good years and there are bad years. And so have a steady cash flow to offset the bad years is a big, big deal. So she started rallying these conservative Republicans to stand up and say, we need a lot more wind. And she discovered who could make that happen, which was the Public Utilities Commission. This is what's so important. The decision-making venue has to be revealed or you don't have a strategy. And it's not the general public. It's never the general public. It's specific individuals targeting specific actions. So she went to the Public Utilities Commission in Colorado, didn't quite get it done. She went to the state legislature, didn't quite get it done, and ultimately organized a plebiscite, a vote of the citizens. And here's what happens. You take the money that you send every month in your utility bill and send it to the right choices instead of the wrong choices. So let me expand on that a little bit, if I may. 40% of the carbon in America goes through monopoly pipes, that's natural gas, and monopoly wires for electricity, 40%. Anything that's a physical monopoly gets regulated, or should get regulated, because otherwise they can price gouge. So who does that? Every state has a Public Utilities Commission. If you want to be considered the most boring human being at a party, use those three words, or building codes, there's two more. So these people decide where your money lands, clean choices or dirty choices. And therefore, the Public Utilities Commissions are amongst the most powerful actors on climate change on planet Earth. I'll give you a little math on this. There are 50 states in America, last time I checked. If you say there are 5 public utility commissioners per state, that's 250 people control 40% of the carbon emissions. 250 people. Speed and scale, right? So skip the little ones. Let's focus on the biggest 30 states and forget the littlest 20 states. And then you don't have to win every argument by a 5-0 vote. A 3-2 vote is just fine for me. So now you've got 90 people in America deciding on close to 40% of the carbon emissions. Where do they live? What do they do? They're called Public Utilities Commissions. They're supposed to serve the public. Some of them actually do. California, they do. Colorado, they now are champions of this. So bit by bit, they begin to change the way your money is spent so that more is spent on solar or on wind or offshore wind and less is spent on coal and natural gas. They control the keys to the machinery. So this opens up a regulatory, an advocacy strategy. Go talk to them. Call them on the phone. Go to the meetings. Listen, learn, act. Because public utilities commissions follow rules that are very similar to the justice system, to courts. They have dockets. They have timetables. They have rules for evidence. It's wide open. They have to take evidence from the public. So as soon as you understand who makes the decisions and how they make the decisions, your opportunity begins. And so this woman I am going to tie this up with your question.
I'll find
Believe it
your
or not, she just pushed and pushed and pushed, and now Excel, which is the biggest utility in Colorado, is the most fierce advocate for clean energy and has a legal commitment to go to 100% clean energy. So you've taken this huge apparatus and made it our friend instead of our foe by pointed, focused, precision interventions.
If I could, in the news right now, we're hearing about the Air Quality Control Commission for Colorado, which hasn't been stepping up. They have not been working hard enough to reduce ozone emissions. And the Front Range, it's a big deal. You have ozone days in Denver when you're not supposed to go outside, you're not supposed to breathe. And we have both groups of elected officials like CC4CA, it's called the Colorado Communities for Climate Action, which I'm a member of as the representative from Pitkin County. And they've sent me some questions to give you, the hard questions for later. But we are going in and lobbying, attending these meetings and testifying. They have to take our testimony, but citizens can do it as well. And it's better if individual citizens, children, people come in, young mothers with babies come in and demand that they clean up the air. They have to listen. And we're moving them very gradually. It's like trying to move an iceberg out of the way, right? But it's happening. And I think we're lucky in Colorado that it is happening, what you described,
Yep.
starting with that woman on the Front Range. So there are other stories. I want to hear more because my intent tonight is to try to inspire people to decide to take that first step to taking action. There was a group of school kids in Maryland that didn't want to have, they had an asthma problem, right? Talk about that if you would. It's in the book, but I'll give you a preview here.
Yeah. So diesel smoke is a carcinogen and a mutagen. It's bad. And most school buses are diesel. And most of them actually have horrible ventilation systems. The diesel smoke comes out of the tailgate and filters back in to the. So we're poisoning our kids every morning. That's not okay. So why not make the buses electric? They're stop and go. They have fixed routes. They have school buses can have higher capital costs because they have a long lifetime. So these kids in Maryland basically went on strike following Greta Thunberg. They asked for clean buses. And when kids ask you for something, it tends to happen, or it can happen. It creates, I sometimes say, I didn't invent this, every good argument has logos, pathos, and ethos. Logos is the math, figure things out. Pathos is your feelings about something. And ethos is who are you and what credibility do you bring to the argument. And kids who breathe have a lot of ethos. And they have a certain amount of pathos as well. And their solution had logos. And so they went to the school board and they demanded clean buses, and they got them.
But it wasn't that easy. The school board said, we can't afford this. An electric bus costs 2 or 3 times as much as a diesel bus. You're out of your mind. I hear that every day when I talk about electric buses. So what happened?
Well, this gets into the whole question about capital costs versus variable costs. So electric buses are expensive to buy, cheap to run. The school board had to decide to make the money fungible, to do the time value of money to offset the capital costs. And they ultimately did it. And I don't know if that covers your...
Well, they found some financing, right? They found creative financing with a bond issue or something.
Exactly.
In order to get it done. So the kids and their parents forced the issue.
And so the lesson, and I'm sorry I was a little slow on the uptake here, is you have to understand the obstacle to your strategy, and you have to find a creative way around it. And there are creative ways around it. Right. Clean energy is cheaper than dirty energy. What I say sometimes is, it's now cheaper to save the earth than to ruin it. That doesn't mean we've stopped ruining it yet. That's necessary but not sufficient condition.
Right. If I could bring it back locally, we have a local school board. We have elections fairly often. They just decided to replace the power plant and do a lot of renovation on our Aspen schools. The jury's out on how good a job they did on electrification, or what costs more to electrify your heated sidewalks, or hire the guy who drives all the way from Silt to plow it for you. You know, there are a lot of interesting questions there. It's not easy. None of this is easy.
Yeah.
But I think it requires vigilance. And so I'm making plugs for people to get on the school boards and join the commissions and the boards and all of our advisory boards that we rely upon. We have a city council election coming up. I hear it's too late to actually apply to run. That's unfortunate. But if you have a chance to run for office or get on a board, an advisory board, there's my plug. Please do. Go ahead.
Can I just add a couple thoughts about what kids can do and what's coming up, which is a fantastic opportunity. When the Environmental Protection Agency issues a regulation on air quality, it has to go through a public hearing process. It's called the Administrative Procedures Act. And now that we have a split Congress, more and more stuff will be done through EPA regulation and less done through the offices of your Congress members. So the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is going to unleash a rafter of clean energy laws, regulations in the next 2 years. There will be dozens by this time next year. And they all have to go through the Administrative Procedures Act, which means they have to hold public hearings on all the major ones. Who goes to those public hearings? And they hold them in Pittsburgh and Des Moines and Portland, all across the country. They'll do probably 5 to 10 hearings per reg. And they have to take into account what's said at those hearings. So who is going to go to those hearings? The manufacturers of cars and trucks will be there. Home builders will be there. The industrial customers or industrial companies will be there. What about the people who breathe? How many of them are going to be there? Why shouldn't there be more? So when I was at the Hewlett Foundation, there was a series of air quality laws that came into being, or that were being proposed, and we're coming up to this process. And we organized and supported action groups in every single one of the cities where these hearings were to be held. And we got doctors in white coats to testify about kids. We got kids with asthma, moms with kids with asthma to talk. They destroyed the opposition. It was a beautiful thing. It's the way democracy should work. But you have to know the regulation is pending. You have to know where the decisions are going to be made, where the hearings are going to be held. You have to know the arguments of it. It doesn't mean every kid has to know every regulatory thing. They're providing an ethical presence for what that commission should do or what the hearing should be like. We supported scientists to write op-eds in the paper in every city on the day of the hearing. This cost nothing. The benefits were staggering. We're about to see a replay of that. We're going to watch the EPA in the next 12 and 18 months put forward regulations that go through this process. It's a fantastic opportunity to intervene. And that's what the book's all about. It's basically saying, how do you win these decisions? And you have to know something about the decision-making venue, but then you hit it very hard. You have to do the math, understand the solution, know the venue, and hit it hard.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna move now to. There's a little bit of controversy in this book. We'll give a hint.
You may have read it better than I did.
You'll find some things in here that you might not. They'll be hard to swallow at first. I predict that while we have environmentalists who are working hard to combat climate change, they're going to be rubbing up against the environmentalists who are trying to protect landscapes and protect watersheds and protect. And we actually have it here. Coal Basin in our own community is a great example of this. We have the people who did the restoration on Coal Basin after 100 years of coal mining who don't want anyone going in there. And I understand why. Coal Basin is the greatest secret place I didn't know about in Pitkin County. If you have a
just
chance
blew
to
it.
go, I know, you're gonna have to go check it out. But the fact is, there are methane seeps coming out of the ground from the old mines that are putting out almost the equivalent amount, at least in the same order of magnitude as all of the pollution in Pitkin County combined, are coming out in the form of methane leaks. So do we go in and do something about it, or do we keep out because it's been restored to some extent? So we're going to see some conflict there. The book talks a little bit about that, and I want to focus on the NEPA process, the National Environmental
Policy Act.
Can you flesh that out better than I can?
So the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, was formed, I think, in 1972 as part of this great sweep of environmental regulations, the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, and so forth. And it basically says large projects that that require permits have to have an analysis of alternatives. And it doesn't say you have to do the smart alternative. You just have to analyze all the alternatives. Then you can be as stupid as you want to be. And I'm not exaggerating, because if you look at how many people have used the NEPA process to get stuff permitted that should never be permitted. So environmental groups used what was a very slender reed, and they sued and stopped projects because of the process of the assessments under NEPA was incorrectly done. So if you didn't do an ecosystem analysis, you just looked at or you looked at too small an area, or you didn't consider downwind problems. If you don't consider the alternatives, they can throw away your whole project. And it happened again and again. And environmental groups got very good at it. And God bless them, they should, right? Mm-hmm. We need these standards. At the same time, if you want to have a renewables intensive grid, for example, to shut down the coal mines and shut off natural gas, you have to put up a lot of transmission lines and a lot of solar power plants. So how do you square those two things? And it gets more complicated than that because of NIMBYism, which is sometimes a great force and not always a great force, right? And also because the constitutional structure of environmental groups became more and more about stopping bad projects. And they got good at it, which is very different from starting good projects. So this is a bad problem right now. Our installations of clean energy in Germany, for example, are running at 1/20th the required rate for them to meet their climate goals. And they say in Germany, every kilometer has one resistance group, right? But you can't just willy-nilly you can't go to the Snowmass Maroon Bells wilderness and put up power plants or towers or transmission lines. So what we've argued for is don't relax the standards, but speed up the process. And then pre-zone areas for development. So if it's a highway corridor, it might be a dandy place to put up a transmission line. And if you set your criteria in advance and you say, and you pre-zone, then there's no reason you can't solve these problems in advance and get things permitted much more clearly. It requires a proactive, I hate that word, but here I go. You could say active, Mr. Harvey? It requires an active deliberation in designing your policy. And who's doing that? Who's supposed to be doing it? The people that put up the wind towers, the windmills, are desperately seeking this kind of problem, but they have not organized themselves. I'll give you an example. There's a billionaire right-wing oil man in Denver named Phil Anschutz. He has been working for 15 years to build the largest wind farm in America. It's in the eastern plains of Wyoming, which make the eastern plains of Colorado look good, which is not saying anything. So he spent over 100 million years, 15 years so far, to get the permits. And it's the windiest spot in America. So if that doesn't get the job done, how are we going to transition off fossil fuels? So we need a different strategy, a different approach. And it won't be comfortable. My favorite example is one that I got to witness. When we started the Energy Foundation in 1990, the windmills killed a lot of birds, a lot of raptors, chopped them up. Condor cuisinarts, they called them. And so we gave a grant to the Audubon Society to work with wind turbine owners to come up with a solution. We didn't know what it was going to be. And they studied this, and they discovered, shocking I know, that migratory birds follow certain routes. And you shouldn't put windmills in those routes. So we stopped, and the bird deaths just plummeted. Now, not everything's that easy, but the point was to take legitimate environmental issues into account, but don't use them without rationale to kill projects that we need.
Great, thank you. I wanted to get, I'm going to jump ahead here. You have a bit about saying yes, and I think that's kind of, how do we say yes more quickly while still maintaining a standard for environmental protection? And I think you did that very well. The book has several great examples. Another controversial thing I'll bring up, and I think this might be my last question for you, and we can open it up, or I can go to my CC4CA questions. You talk about hydrogen energy as an energy form. You talk about nuclear. Nuclear is back. Geothermal's always been there, but it's somehow it seems to be hard to. And now we've got fusion. Since you've written this book, all of a sudden fusion is back in play. What can you tell us about innovative technologies? What does it take? The interesting part, in addition to the controversy perhaps that might come from a discussion about nuclear with a group of environmentalists, was about, boy, I lost my train of thought as I said that. Maybe I should just stick with that. Let's talk about the controversy and then I'll get back to the next bit.
Yeah. So when you're in the energy space long enough, you get inured to magical thinking. And there's a lot of magical thinking that goes around. We need new technologies. We don't have all the problems solved. The long-term future is complicated. And we need to stipulate that. And there are problems with our favorite solutions. Can you imagine trying to sell solar panels in Buffalo, New York this week? Right? You'd be laughed out of town. You'd be run out of town with guns because they're legal there. So I can sit here and say the cheapest form of energy on planet Earth is solar, which is true. But what I also need to say is I can build you a grid that's more reliable than the grid you have and cheaper. And that's possible, but it's not automatic. It makes you rethink how you design the entire grid. And what you use fossil fuels for backup, for the week in Buffalo, when everything's frozen. Don't use it as a base load fuel.
Uh-oh.
Just don't get the book wet. So the first thing we have to do is commit to speed and scale and to have strategies that deploy massive amounts of clean energy. I'll give you an example. In China, we do a lot of work in China. Coal use is going down even as coal power plants are going up. What the hell is going on? It's puzzling. What's going on is they're using their plants less and less, but they want them there for backup. So I sometimes say fossil fuel for power, not for energy. So power is the episodic use of energy. Forget that.
Got it. Okay.
Let me get back to your question.
You can finish it. Yeah. I figured out what I'm going to say.
So the first thing you have to do is make sure that your current solutions, which are cost effective, are robust, resilient, safe, as well as being clean. And that can be done, but it's not automatic. And to pretend that all those issues are solved, or that somebody was taught how to turn on power plants back in the 50s when I was born, not quite, can run today's grid, that's just wrong. But then you say, what do we need in the long-term future? We need fuel for aviation that's truly clean. We need to work in climates that are not conducive to wind or solar, or time periods that are not conducive to wind and solar and so forth. So there's a bunch of cool ideas. Take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and stuff it into a hole in the ground. And I visited the biggest carbon capture and, it wasn't used as a carbon capture and sequestration plant. It was direct air capture. It's in Iceland. I was there this summer. Olafur Grimsson here was president of Iceland for many, many years. It's an amazing technology. Does it scale? Not yet. Could it scale someday? Maybe. So we should spend money on finding out. It's not an automatic yes. Spending money on trying to solve problems is not the same thing as claiming that they are solved, right? If you look at all the enthusiasm about nuclear power, you need reactors that are cheap, that are resistant to nuclear bomb proliferation, that are not likely to blow up in an accident, that are not used as targets in war. That's the newest addition. And that you have a waste disposal strategy for. There's no nuclear strategy on the horizon that meets those 5 criteria. And I would say, if you can't meet them all, you do not have a viable solution. Does that mean we should spend no more money on researching nuclear? No. Should we declare that's the answer? That's insane. We can find out. We need to spend more money on energy R&D, but you should spend the money on finding out whether something can be produced rather than advertising that it has been produced.
Last.
Can I just do a little time check?
Sure. Yeah,
It's
I was
about
gonna get my
5:20.
last question,
Wow.
5:20.
So
Okay, I'll wrap it
would
up.
be great, and maybe a little time for questions too, so we could wrap up in 15 or 20 minutes.
Yep, that's right on target. My last question on this, it's in the book, is that it was kind of fascinating to discover that virtually every idea, every new technology, everything that has come along at the hands of, you think of the brilliant scientists and the innovators who've brought us these products, whether it was Tesla originally, or Edison, or Musk, even more recently. Where did the technologies come from? A lot of people think that we don't want to spend government money throwing it down a rabbit hole on some new technology. Could you pop that bubble for us?
So every single major energy technology has been either paid for by the government, the invention of it, or has been at the least had obstacles removed, huge obstacles removed. So you think of nuclear power, entirely government programs. Coal, combined cycle advanced coal uses turbines that were invented by the aerospace industry. Fracking, George Mitchell plus the Department of Energy built that. 3D seismic, 3D mapping of the underground seismology, Department of Energy policy. The Great Dams in the Pacific Northwest, paid for with federal funds. Solar cells started out that with the satellite systems and so on through. So this has never been a pure private sector play, and to pretend it has been is kind of obnoxious and wrong. On the other hand, you want the private sector to scrub out bad ideas and promote good ideas. So they say the private sector, they say capitalism is a good servant but a terrible master. And it's profoundly true in the energy space.
This goes to the high-tech computer space as well. I think about
Yes.
DARPA, and every
Yes.
form of software you have was probably initiated at a government lab somewhere.
Well, Al Gore was right. He did invent the internet. He didn't, but he wrote the bill, which was passed, which created ARPA, which created the internet. So there's pretty direct lineage.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that. There's so much more in this book. We haven't scratched the surface. I recommend you all get it and read it. And you may need to read it twice like I did. And there's still more that I'm discovering in it. But the thing that's most valuable to me are the anecdotes about individuals and small groups of people who made things happen. And we live in a target-rich environment here in Aspen and in Colorado for making things happen. And so that's my plug, and I'm hoping what I end up with is a lot of new allies in our battles with Gore and with the county and the city for all the good work we're trying to do on all fronts. I'm going to skip my questions from the CC4CA people because they're too granular, they're too molecular maybe, and I'll share those with you later. If anybody has a burning question, I guess we'll take one or two, but then I think we're going to wrap it up, and Hal will probably sign a book or two if you'd like. Olafur, you're in the front row. You probably have a question of Hal, anything.
Yeah, Olafur has answers.
He has answers. Oh, ask him a question, Hal.
Oliver, speak.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, we now have the technology to take carbon from the atmosphere and pump it into the ground where it touches base with basalt and turns into rock in 2 years. And these basalt layers are almost everywhere. They're in the United States, they're in India, they're everywhere. But you're right, the question of scale. And I used the example when Henry Ford introduced the first car. Very few people knew what a petrol station was. Now everybody does.
Yeah.
So we basically have to reverse the pumping process, because now we have the technology, since CO2 goes all around the globe. We just have to create this pumping station where basalt is.
Right. And where
then-
cheap energy is,
Yes.
like geothermal.
Yeah. Or hydro or solar or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
So for the benefit of the microphones, I just wanted to say what Olafur has shared with us is that they do have a successful program in Iceland for returning carbon into basalt layers in rock. And you point out basalt is everywhere. think we have a basalt about.
We named a town. We named a town about it.
And so maybe it's just a matter of beginning the practice and figuring out how to do it at scale.
But the math is tough
Right.
because somebody has to pay you to run this machinery 24/7. And so far it's not cheap, although keep working.
Well, we are building a terminal now where it's based on transporting the carbon from Europe on vessels, and they will pay for it to be pumped down into the ground. So that is the proof that this is already commercially viable.
So they're going to be shipping it from Europe to Iceland.
Yeah, there are companies who want to get rid of it in a proper way.
Right. I'm going to go to another question. I'm going to right here and then back to you, Eric. Go ahead.
I think it was not last winter, but the winter before, the Texas grid was
collapsed.
5 minutes from blackout. The California grid this year had trouble. Any thoughts on how to respond to people who want to point the finger at solar and renewable
Repeat the
energy?
question. What happened in Texas and in again this year in California, right?
And any thoughts on how to respond to people who
Yeah.
point the finger at solar and renewable energy as the cause?
Well, you have to determine whether you're dealing with a logical person or not. If you are, you're lucky, especially if you're in Texas. I'm about to get run out of the room, I can tell. But what happened in Texas a year ago, or was it 2 years ago?
Last
2 years ago.
Yeah.
The piles of coal froze. The natural gas systems froze. The windmills kept going. The wind turbines kept going. So it was profoundly and purposefully misconstrued, misappropriate. Why? Because the battles between clean energy and conventional energy are drawn pretty strongly right now. The irony is Texas has more wind power than twice as much as California, which is number 2. Oklahoma is fast upon them, and so is Nebraska. So wind power is breaking out of the red-blue dichotomy. I mentioned this example with Phil Anschutz. So the first thing I would say to your Texan or your combatant, your arguer, is do your homework. You'll find out that clean energy was reliable. It wasn't enough. Back to the point I tried to make earlier, we need to posit strategies that are not only cost effective but are incredibly reliable. And that requires a bigger grid and more balancing and a mixture of ways of meeting the reliability constraints. So batteries, yes, sometimes. Running the natural gas turbines for a week or two, not a problem. We'll keep those turbines there, we just won't use them very often. Super cheap. Energy efficiency, fix your windows, fix your building codes. Houston does not have a building code that covers energy issues. That's insane, right? So let's do half a dozen smart things instead of one stupid thing.
Words to live by.
Sorry, I get a little animated when. So clean energy is not the problem, but it will be called the problem. And the best way around it is just to talk system architecture, which thrills everybody.
I know I'm running out of time. Eric, a quick question, and then we're going to wrap it up and go to the books.
I was fortunate enough to attend the Aspen Ideas Climate Festival in Miami in the spring and to talk with Westinghouse Chief Technology Officer who talked about where they are on nuclear. And they have developed reactors that should go online in 28 after they get permitted. You can put a nuclear reactor on a semi and set it up in a week. It's not big, but they have all different sizes, and they burn fuel that has already been burned. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on the development, those developments in the nuclear area.
So
Just to repeat that.
Oh, yeah.
Do the synopsis. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Westinghouse technology leaders claim they have essentially mobile, small-sized nuclear reactor technology now. I've never seen. There's half a dozen intriguing designs that are being promoted right now. None of them solve all 5 of the problems that I mentioned before, and the specific problem that the Westinghouse model has is nuclear bomb proliferation. they get into highly enriched uranium. That's bad stuff. I think, some of these reactors will be built, but overall nuclear power, love it or hate it, is on a secular decline. It's just the math of the situation right now. That doesn't mean the future will mimic the past, but it's a pretty high hurdle for nuclear to overcome all 5 of those obstacles simultaneously. I hope it works.
Thank you. Are you optimistic about the future, Hal?
I am. This is a great year.
Okay.
We passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which will allocate $400 billion more. The Infrastructure Act, which $75 billion, I think, is the number for new transmission lines, which are necessary. A fee on methane emissions. 75% of all new USPS, Postal Service vehicles have to be electric, which is pretty cool. California forbids the sale of internal combustion engine cars by 2035. Europe is following California on this. Europe's Fit for 50 program is much larger than the Inflation Reduction Act. Fit for 55, they're going to reduce their carbon emissions by 55% compared to 1990. Still not enough, but a hell of a start. China built more renewables than the rest of the world put together. All this in the last year. All that said, we're not at the pace we need to be by a considerable distance. We need to repeat this year several times over to get where we need to get. It's cost effective to do it. It's politically difficult. This gets back to the last point I'll make, which is know who makes the decision that you care desperately about and find out where their vulnerability or where their strengths are and help them out. Get it right.
Thank you. Thanks, Hal Harvey. There's more in the book.